Hello, I'm Leanne from the Haberdashery, and in this video I'm going to be making the Megan Nielsen Brumby skirt. So I'm actually going to be making this one here that's on the front. This is version 1, and I'm going to be making it out of this lovely black deadstock denim. Because it's denim, I've also got this recycled polyester thread. I found that other threads just aren't strong enough, so cotton just isn't strong enough to work with denim. I have heard that Tencel is a good solution, but I've not tried it yet, so I have made sure to get recycled polyester and not virgin polyester though. Just quickly, I've not been sponsored by Megan Nielsen to make this, I've decided to make it for myself. So let's get started on making. I'm going to get this all cut out first. So I've got my fabric all cut out, and the first thing that I need to do is on this front piece we're going to align the pocket with our pocket lining. So we want our skirt piece right side up, we want our pocket piece right side down, like this. And you want to make sure that your notches on the side align as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew all the way along this line and attach these two pieces together. That's our first step. Okay, so I've gone around both of my pockets on my front pieces, and the next job is to clip this edge here. So the reason that we want to clip is to allow the seam to bend in on itself effectively without bunching. You can also cut some of the seam allowance away to make that a bit easier, but you don't want to cut too much off there. Another option, if you have them, is to use pinking shears. They work perfectly because of the way that they already cut the edges into triangles. That means that your fabric can bend a lot easier, but if you don't have pinking shears, just make a snip every so often, regular as you can, distances around this edge. And then after we've done that, we need to press the pocket around on the other side. So we're going to flip it around, press it down, and it should sit, if the clippings work properly, it should sit nice and evenly then. So as you can see, now we've pressed it, it sits nice and flat, there's no bunching, it's just a nice professional looking seam. So I've actually pressed mine with a tiny little bit of overhang on the denims because I don't want the lining to show through on the front side. It is all nice and flat. So now the job that we have to do to keep it in place is to top stitch all the way along this seam. With top stitching, take your time because this is what is going to be the most obvious feature, especially if you're using a contrasting colour like I am. So don't rush it. Curves in particular can be quite difficult, so sew slowly, enjoy the process, and try not to make too many mistakes by rushing. Okay, so now we've done our top stitching, what we need to do is pop the skirt wrong side up, and we're going to take our pocket facing and also place it wrong side up. And you want these curved edges to match with your pocket lining. So what we need to do is, we actually need to be quite careful with this because we don't want to sew through all of these layers. We only want to sew through these two here. So when you're pinning and when you're sewing, be very careful to make sure that you've just got these two layers here. Now that we've sewn the facing to our pocket lining, next step is to finish these seam edges. There's lots of ways that you can finish edges. If you have an overlocker, you can just run it through the overlocker. It's also known as a serger. You can trim and zigzag along here, that will finish your raw edges. What I think I'm going to do is trim some of the seam allowance back, and then I'm going to put some bias binding around it. Okay, so I've actually gone ahead and done the next step as well. So I've finished my seams with my bias binding, and I've done some stitching down the side and at the top here, just to keep the pocket in place. So you can see that's sat nicely and in place now. You want to make sure when you do these basting stitches that you do them well within your seam allowance. So even though the instructions say to do it at 1.2 centimetres from the edge, I've actually done it 1 centimetre from the edge, just to make sure that this stitch line won't show when we finish these seams. What we have to do next is our waistband. And here are our waistband pieces. So that's the front. And here's the two sides. Now, I've already interfaced the back of these, but if you haven't already done that, you will need to do it. Okay, and with right sides together, we're going to do these seams here. The waistband is all nicely stitched together. We don't stitch these two parts together because these will be attached to your zip. So all nicely laid out here, and I've also pressed the seams open. Now, because we're putting a facing on the waistband, you actually don't need to bother finishing these seams at all. They'll be completely encased, so don't worry about doing any of that. Just press them open, and that's all you need to do. Next, we're coming back to the front of our skirt. We're going to finish these edges off here, these centre edges, and then one on top of the other, stitch them together. Down there. The reason that we finish the edges first is because they're going to be pressed open. So because I'm using bias tape, I'm going to be putting bias tape down each of the pieces before stitching them together. You can do it afterwards, but the instructions do say to do it beforehand, and it will give you an idea of where your stitching needs to be. Okay, so I've done my centre seam and I've pressed it open. Now, I actually had to unpick this section here. You can see that my stitching on my bias binding wasn't perfect, and actually some of the blue was poking out on the front, which didn't look brilliant. So although it says to do the finishing of your seams first in the instructions, if you're going to bias bind like me, I would probably recommend doing it after. That would have been an easier job, and that would have meant that I wouldn't have had to unpick that section there and then redo it. But that's all fine now. You can see there's no blue showing. So the next job is to top stitch either side of your centre seam, and that's just for decoration really, but it'll also keep these seams in place, these seam allowances that we've just opened. So you can see I've done my top stitching down the centre on both sides of the seam, and so what we're going to do next is attach the back of the skirt to the sides of our front pieces. When attaching the back, make sure that your centerpiece has the double notch in the middle. Don't accidentally put this on the side seam. This is a notch that tells you where your zipper is going. We're going to sew along this edge. We're going to finish our seams, so I'll be doing my bias binding, and then you want to press the seams. Our next step of the project is to gather the skirt. Now, because I'm working in denim, it might be a bit difficult to do the traditional way with gathering. Set a very long stitch length in your machine, so probably 4mm upwards. Have a long tail on your thread to begin with. Sew along the edge of your piece that you're gathering. Make sure you do it within the seam allowance as well. You don't want your gathers showing on the other side. And then leave a long tail of thread at the end. You don't ever backstitch, because the whole point is you want to be moving the fabric along the thread. In the instructions for denim, there is actually a method to gather using cord. I'm not exactly sure how it works though, because I can't see how the cord affects the fabric. So I've gathered my top edge of my skirt. Now we need to attach it to our waistband, and then we can even out all of the gathers easily then before we stitch it to the waistband. When you put your waistband on, just be aware that there are notches along the top edge. So I've got two there, there's two in the middle here, look. So this is the edge where you'll want to align it to your waistband facing. So you actually want to use this bottom edge to align to this edge here. Like so. So I've stitched my gathers. I don't think I've ever managed to stitch gathers evenly, but I'm quite impressed with this, given that it's a difficult fabric to work with, especially around these seam areas where there's lots of fabric under there. There are 1 or 2 points. That was where my gather line broke anyway, so I can fish that out. But otherwise, I've managed to keep that gather line in the seam, which is good. So I'm going to snip all of these extra lines that we don't need now that we're not gathering, and press all of this upwards into the waistband. And the next thing that we actually do is the zipper, actually, not the waistband at all. Let's get these all nice and neat and ready for the zipper. Right, so now we're ready to install our zipper, and you can see I've put some fusible interfacing in just to make this easier to work with as we do the next steps, because we're actually going to be cutting into part of the denim to fold it back and make it easier to install the zipper. So this just helps that along a bit. Now you don't need to go all the way up to the top of your waistband, because that already has interfacing on, so you just go to the top of this back piece. So what I'm going to do now is just carefully mark where I want my stitch lines to be, and then I'm going to run that through the sewing machine. Don't use too long of a stitch for this. I'd probably stick around 3.5 mil. I won't go anything bigger than that like you might for a regular basting stitch. So you can see I've done my stitching along the lines of where I marked out. What I need to do next is very carefully cut at a 45-degree angle in this corner here. That will allow this bottom flap to sit down and take the bottom of the zipper tape and take it nice and evenly without any bunching. But you need to be careful that you don't clip into your stitches. So do it very, very carefully. There we go. Like so. And now that we've done that, I'm obviously going to do the same on the second side, but we actually attach these back seams of the centre of the skirt together. So that's the next step. You don't want to go past your stitch marks here when you're doing that seam. You only want to go up to them. So don't go into this bit that you've just opened up, because that will make life difficult when you try and attach the zipper. This is what you should end up with once you've sewn and pressed your seam and you've pressed these edges out. You need to press them up to the edge of the stitches. So now we start adding our zipper. To do that, we turn it right side out first of all. So now we've got our skirt here, like so. We want to take our zipper, and we're going to lie it right side down and align the stop with your stay stitches here. So we're going to just carefully sew just at the end of this stop, and all we're trying to do is sew where these basting stitches are. So you don't need to go all the way across, you just need to just attach both sides of the zipper tape where the basting stitches are. And once we've done that, we can flip it up like so. You'll notice that I've swapped to my zipper foot. You'll always want to use a zipper foot whenever possible around a zipper. It means you can get as close as possible to the zipper without the hardware of the zipper itself pushing your presser foot around and your stitch line out of the way. So if I flip this zipper back now, you can see actually that I didn't quite hide my basting stitches. You want to try and line this up so that you're stitching right across these stitches here. So I'm actually going to unpick what I've just done and try it again, get it a bit closer so that you can hide these. But the next step is actually to start attaching the edge of your skirt to your zipper. So you'll need to turn it inside out for that, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So you can see I've redone my stitch line and I've hidden those basting stitches, so that's in the right place now. So the way that we need to attach this zipper is to actually do this one at a time, and you want to be sewing along these basting stitches that you did earlier to attach it to the zipper. Now you're not looking at going all the way close to the zipper, like right to the teeth like that, because you run the risk of getting the fabric stuck in the teeth when you use the zipper. So you do want to show some of the zipper tape. So you want to be aiming to stitch around sort of here. Now helpfully on my tape, I'm not sure whether you can see this, but there is a line going through the centre of the herringbone of the tape, which I can align these basting stitches to. So don't worry about doing this side just yet. Focus on the first side, get that right, then do this other side. Once you've stitched all of that together, we can press it all into place, and then we're going to top stitch around it to keep the zipper in place and to stop any seam allowance from ruffling up. So you can see I've not stitched perfectly along these basting stitches. So rather than redo my stitching alongside the zipper, I might just take these out with a seam ripper, because we're going to be top stitching this anyway. So you want it to be nice and neat, and you don't want any loose stitches getting in the way. Otherwise, you know, one side is ever so slightly closer to the other, but I'm happy with this. I'm not going to unpick it and try again. It's in the right place. So what is not mentioned in the instructions, but that we haven't done yet, is actually finishing all these seams. So that's what I'm going to do next, is I'm going to finish them nicely like this, because then we go on to doing the waistband after doing all of our top stitching. So we want to be able to hide these seams in the waistband, you know, like we're doing there. So yes, my next step is to finish off these seams, then do the top stitching, and then we'll move on to doing this waistband. So I've done my top stitching around the edge of my zipper. It's not the neatest, the gathers do make it difficult, and all of this bulk where we've got all the denim from the gathers adds to that, but I'm happy with it. it's a handmade item at the end of the day. You're never going to get everything perfect, so you will end up with a couple of mistakes, and I don't mind that being one of them. So the next step is to do the waistband facing. You can see I've chosen to use the lining material rather than make it out of denim. And we're just going to do as we did before, line these edges up, and then we're going to stitch down here and down here. Once we've done that, we press those seams open, and we also press the bottom edge, which is this one. We press that in like that. Here's my waistband facing. I've pressed all of the seams open, I've folded this edge under, and I've also pressed the sides in at 2.5 centimetres, so an inch or so. This is 1.5 centimetres around this bottom edge. So you do need to make sure that it's the bottom and not the top that you're pressing. The top has the notches, and you're going to need them because you're about to line up this facing with the skirt. So we put the skirt down. We're aligning this top edge now, so you want right sides together, and I'm going to get this all pinned, and then we're going to sew around this. So you want to make sure that you catch the zipper tape when you sew around, so you'll need to come down to sort of here to make sure that you catch your zipper tape. But because you can start and end obviously on these edges, you should be able to align that without too much trouble. So I've been careful to catch the zipper tape, and I've gone all the way around my waistband. So now what you want to do is flip your facing up, and you actually want to stitch the seam allowance to the facing so that when we press this down and round, it sits in place, particularly here where it gets a bit bulky. Okay, that will help that sit nice and flat then. So you go all the way around here and then press it round and over. So I've stitched all around the edge of the facing, and I've pressed it all down so it's facing flat. What I actually realised I had to redo just the edges by the zipper, because you want to flip this turned over edge around the zipper tape to catch it, otherwise you end up with a little sticky outy bit of zipper tape but it doesn't look right. And this is, you know, you want it to look nice when it's all finished anyway, so you hand stitch down the edge with the zippers. So I haven't done that yet. And what you can do is top stitch around this bottom edge so that you catch that bit in and go all the way around the edge of the waistband. I've actually just decided that I quite like it as it is and I don't want to top stitch, so I'm also going to hand stitch all of that down all the way around. It'll take a while to do, but I quite like how it looks at the moment, so I'm going to keep it that way. And that means that the last thing I have left to do, on my sewing machine at least, is this hem. So the first thing that you'll need to do is press, it says 0.6 centimetres, but to be honest, with how bulky and thick this is, I'd probably do a centimetre. Press all the way around, a centimetre up, and then we're gonna flip it up again and press, so we have a rolled hem, but the hem is actually quite tall. So it comes 2.5 inches up from the bottom, which is about 6 centimetres or so. Now I might not actually take it that tall, that's what's suggested. I prefer slightly longer skirts. Even though I have long legs, I'm not a fan of skirts being too short, so I might just turn it up a couple of centimetres instead. And then you stitch the hemline around the edge. So press this about a centimetre in first, and then press it in and stitch around the edge, and that will give you a nice neat hem. And here is my finished Brumby skirt. So I spent some time just carefully stitching this waistband facing into place. Stitching it down the side of the zip was actually quite difficult, mainly because the nylon of the zip is so tightly woven. But I would recommend, if you're going to hand stitch like I did, to pin the facing in place, because there was a couple of times where I had to unpick what I'd done just because the stitching had skewed a little bit, and so the facing wasn't sitting right and it got a bit frustrating. Once I pinned it in place, it made it much easier. But I am glad overall that I decided to hand stitch. I think it looks really nice as it is on the front, but the main reason is because whilst stitching this hem, my machine actually had quite a bit of difficulty. So particularly around these areas of the seams where we've got quite a lot of bulk underneath there, it really struggled, and I had to hand crank it through those seams quite a few times just to make sure that it got through there without breaking the needle, which it did eventually. It just took a lot longer than I expected. Overall, it's actually quite a straightforward to make, this this skirt. The gathering was the hardest part, and just getting my machine to cooperate with the hem as well. Otherwise, it's easy enough that I would say you should be able to make it in a day or in a weekend if you maybe don't have enough time throughout the day to spend on sewing. So that makes it a nice quick make in that respect, and I'm really pleased with how it's come out. It looks great. I'll happily be wearing this now that the weather's getting warmer. So if you like this video, please do like it. Please consider subscribing. I haven't been sponsored at all by Megan Nielsen or anyone like that. I earn my money through my shop, so if you'd like to support me, please do consider having a look at my shop and potentially getting some plastic-free haberdashery. That's what I do. I make these clothes for myself, so I'm going to very much enjoy wearing this, and I hope you enjoy making your Brumby skirt and wearing it too.